On Tuesday, August 13th, 1959, a small white sedan was delivered to a car dealer in the Swedish town of Kristianstad. Nobody photographed the moment. No press release went out. It was, by every outward measure, the least important car delivery of the decade. One Volvo PV544, a humpbacked little machine that looked like a 1940s Ford that had shrunk in the wash. But bolted to its front seats was something no production car on Earth had ever carried as standard equipment. A strange V-shaped arrangement of straps designed by a man who had spent his career throwing fighter pilots out of airplanes. That strap was about to become the single most effective life-saving device in the history of the automobile, credited with more than 1 million lives saved. Named by German patent examiners as one of the 8 patents of the last century with the greatest significance for humanity, not for industry, for humanity, alongside things like penicillin-era medicine and the light bulb's descendants. And here's the part that makes this story almost unbelievable. Volvo, a small company from a small country in an industry famous for suing over door handle designs, took this patent, arguably the most valuable piece of intellectual property any carmaker has ever held, and gave it away to everyone, to every competitor on Earth, for free, forever. Meanwhile, in America, where roughly 37,000 people were dying on the roads every single year, drivers would spend the next 25 years fighting, mocking, and literally cutting this gift out of their cars with knives. This is the story of the 3-point seatbelt, the grieving executive who ordered it, the ejection seat engineer who perfected it, the giveaway that shamed an industry, and the one country that resisted it hardest, which, if you grew up in an American backseat in the 60s, was you. So here's the setup. It's 1959, and the American automobile is a role in contradiction. It has never been faster, heavier, or more powerful. The horsepower race is in full sprint. We told you in our Corvette file how the small block V8 lit that fuse in 1955. Interstates are unspooling across the country, engineered for cruising speeds the cars of just 10 years earlier could barely touch. And the interior of that beautiful, powerful car is, in a crash, a torture chamber. A rigid steel steering column aimed at the driver's chest like a lance, a dashboard of gorgeous chromed steel sculpted into points and ridges, a flat windshield waiting an arm's length away, door latches that sprang open under load, hurling occupants onto the pavement, and being thrown from the car, contrary to every barroom theory of the day, was one of the deadliest things that could happen to you. The medical people had a name for what actually killed car occupants: the second collision. The car hits the tree, that's the first collision. Then, a fraction of a second later, the unrestrained human body, still traveling at full speed, hits the inside of the car. The car stops in a crumpled yard of steel. The body stops in inches of dashboard. Physics sends its bill. The yearly toll in America ran to roughly 37,000 dead, a number the country had somehow filed under the price of freedom. And Detroit knew, with documented certainty, that safety was a losing sales pitch. Ford had run the experiment in 1956, a genuine, sincere safety package, padded dash, deep dish steering wheel, optional lap belts, marketed hard. Chevrolet that same year sold horsepower. Chevrolet won the year decisively, and Detroit distilled the lesson into a phrase that governed the industry for a decade: safety doesn't sell. Seatbelts existed. Nash had offered lap belts back in '49, Ford in the mid-50s, as ignored options that most buyers refused and many dealers quietly left in the box. And here's the uncomfortable truth the industry hid behind. The belts of the day were genuinely flawed. To understand why the 3-point belt mattered, you have to understand why the belts before it half deserved their bad reputation. A 1950s seatbelt was a 2-point belt, a single strap, 2 anchors. It came in 2 varieties, and each one solved half the problem while creating a new one. The lap belt ran across your waist, buckle over the stomach. In a serious crash, it held your hips and folded your upper body forward like a jackknife, driving your face toward the dashboard while concentrating the entire force of the crash on the soft tissue of your abdomen. Surgeons of the era saw the internal injuries and coined a grim term for the pattern: The diagonal belt ran from one shoulder across the chest to the opposite hip. It held your torso, and in a violent crash, the body could slide down and out beneath it, or load up the neck, or slip free entirely. Better than nothing, usually. Reliably safe, no. So, in 1959, the state-of-the-art was a choice between two compromises, both uncomfortable, both awkward to fasten, and neither trustworthy at highway speed. This is the detail that reframes the whole story. The seatbelt problem wasn't a parts problem. Any factory could sew a strap. It was an unsolved geometry problem. Where do you route the loads through a human body so that a crash at 60 miles an hour is survivable? Nobody had a production answer. To be scrupulously fair, because this channel's comments section keeps us honest, the idea of combining a lap and shoulder strap already existed on paper. Roger Griswold and the crash survival pioneer Hugh DeHaven had patented a combination lap and shoulder restraint back in 1951. The concept was in the literature. What did not exist anywhere was a version refined enough, simple enough, and comfortable enough to bolt into an ordinary car and hand to an ordinary, impatient, unbelievably stubborn human being. The gap between that paper patent and a working production answer is exactly where our story's engineer lives. But before the engineer comes the grief. Volvo was, and had been since its founding in 1927, a slightly strange car company. Its two founders, an accountant from the ball-bearing business and an engineer, had written the company's soul into a single sentence at the start. Cars are driven by people, and therefore the guiding principle behind everything Volvo makes must be safety. In most companies, that sentence would be a plaque in the lobby. In Gothenburg, they periodically took it literally. In the late 1950s, Volvo's president was Gunnar Engellau, and Engellau carried this subject as a wound, not a slogan. A relative of his had died in a road accident, and by the accounts that have come down to us, the failure of the era's belt, that flawed two-point design we just described, played its part in the death. The president of a car company had watched the state-of-the-art restraint fail someone he knew fatally. Most executives would have commissioned a memo. Engellau went recruiting. In 1958, he reached into Sweden's aircraft industry and pulled out an engineer named Niels Boland and made him Volvo's first dedicated safety engineer with a brief of one sentence: build a belt that actually works. The choice of man tells you everything about how seriously Engellau took it. Niels Boland had spent his entire career at Saab, the aircraft company, where since the mid-50s he had been responsible for ejection seats and pilot rescue systems for supersonic jets. Think about what that job actually is: managing the most violent forces a human body can survive, on purpose, as a product. A man whose day job was firing pilots out of cockpits knew more about restraining a body under crash loads than anyone in the car business. And Boland brought one insight from aviation that cut through 30 years of failed belt design. His pilots, he later observed, would strap on almost anything: 4-point harnesses, 5-point harnesses, straps between the legs, because their lives depended on it and they knew it. Ordinary drivers were the opposite species entirely. They would not tolerate 1 second of discomfort or 1 extra motion of inconvenience. A perfect belt that people wouldn't wear was worth exactly as much as no belt at all. So Boland set himself a design brief that was really a psychology brief. Total protection, fastened with one hand, in one motion, comfortable enough to forget. Roughly a year of work later, he had it, and its elegance still reads like a proof. One strap across the chest from the shoulder, one strap across the hips, both meeting at a single buckle anchored low beside the occupant's hip. The V-shaped geometry routed crash forces into the two strongest structures of the human skeleton, the sternums and the pelvis, and away from the soft abdomen entirely. The low fixed anchor point meant the straps stayed put under load instead of riding up, and the whole thing clicked shut with one hand, in 1 second, exactly as an impatient human required. In our flathead file, we called the Arduin heads a cure for an engine's original sin. This was the same kind of solution, not an accessory bolted onto the problem, but geometry that dissolved it. Volvo patented the design. The American filing came just days after launch, and U.S. Patent 3043625 would issue in 1962 with Bolin as inventor. And on that quiet Tuesday in August 1959, the PV 544 in Kristianstad became the first production car in the world wearing the answer as standard equipment with the Amazon sedan alongside it. The world's reaction? Skepticism, indifference, and, from drivers, something close to resentment at being fussed over. Volvo now owned the most important piece of automotive intellectual property of the century, and almost nobody wanted it. Which brings us to the decision the title promised. Quick pause. If you're getting something from this, hit subscribe. Engine Files opens a story like this every week, the parts, patents, and machines that quietly rebuilt the world. Okay, here's the giveaway. Put yourself in Volvo's boardroom, 1959. You are a small car maker from a country of 7 million people, competing against giants 100 times your size. And you are holding a patent that, if the world ever comes to its senses about crash safety, every single one of those giants will need. Every Ford, every Chevrolet, every Fiat and Toyota and Mercedes, for decades. The licensing revenue is almost beyond calculation. This patent is, potentially, worth more than your entire company. The industry's own norms told Volvo exactly what to do with it. This was and is a business that litigates over grille shapes. Hold the patent, license it dearly, and let the competition's lawyers make you rich. Volvo opened it, free, to every manufacturer on Earth. No license fee, no royalty, no strings. The reasoning, as the company and Bolin framed it then and ever after, fit in one sentence. The invention was too important to profit from. A device that saved lives at this scale belonged to everyone who drove, which meant it had to belong to everyone who built. Let's be precise for the comment section, because "gave away the patent" gets stated loosely across the internet. Volvo held the patent and simply made the design freely available to all comers, no enforcement, no fees, which in practice is a gift with the paperwork of ownership. The distinction matters to lawyers. To General Motors accountants, it meant the same beautiful thing, the best restraint system in the world, free of charge, from a competitor. There is no other decision like it in the history of the car business. We've shown you companies' weaponized rulebooks, Ford's homologation loophole, BMW's wing in the trunk. This is the only file in our catalog where a company held the winning card and declined to play it, on principle, at 9 figures of cost. Whatever cynicism you bring to corporate history, and this channel brings plenty, August 1959 in Gothenburg is where it goes quiet. Now, Volvo just had to convince the world to actually use the thing, and the world, one country above all, had other ideas. The engineering argument was won the way engineers win arguments, with a body count honestly tallied. Through the 60s, as three-point belts spread through Volvo's line and reached the American market in 1963, Bolin's team did something almost nobody in the industry did. They followed their cars into the real world, building accident investigation teams and gathering crash data at scale. In 1967, Bolin stood up at the STAP Car Crash Conference in the United States, the premier scientific gathering on impact survival, and presented a statistical analysis of 28,000 real accidents. The findings landed like a verdict. Unbelted occupants died across the entire speed range. Low-speed crashes killed them too. Belted occupants? Not one fatality below 60 miles an hour. And where the passenger compartment stayed intact, belted occupants essentially did not die at all. The overall protective effect against death and serious injury ran, by the paper's accounting, as high as 75%. One strap, one geometry, 28,000 crashes worth of proof. Washington moved. Ralph Nader's unsafe at any speed had already detonated under Detroit in 1965. The new federal safety bureaucracy was writing its first rules, and Bolin's data helped drive the requirement that from January 1, 1968, every new passenger car sold in America carried lap and shoulder belts in the front. 9 years after Kristianstad, Bolin's geometry was federal law in the biggest car market on Earth. And here is where the story turns into a mirror. Because the cars now had belts, the Americans in them refused to wear them. If you were of a certain age, you don't need this act narrated. You lived it. Through the late 60s and the entire 1970s, American belt use hovered somewhere around 1 driver in 10. The belts hung there mandated and ignored, stuffed down into the seat cracks, buckled behind the back to silence the reminder light, and, in the memorable cases, cut out entirely with a pocket knife. The objections were a national folk religion. I'd rather be thrown clear, the single most fatally wrong sentence in American driving. It'll trap me if the car burns. I'm only going to the store. The government could mandate the hardware, it could not mandate the click. And the household restraint system of the era, every reader over 60 knows it, and most can feel it right now, was dad's or mom's right arm flung across your chest at every hard stop from the command seat of a bench seat sedan while 3 kids slid around the vinyl like bowling pins. An entire generation was protected, to the extent it was protected at all, by parental reflex. Then came 1974, and one of the great regulatory backfires in American history, which many of you remember with a specific personal fury. For that model year, Washington required the ignition interlock, buckle the belt or the car would not start. The engineering worked perfectly, the politics detonated. A nation that tolerated speed limits and emissions gear drew its constitutional line at a car that gave orders. The complaint mail buried Congress, and within months, the law was repealed with prejudice. Congress didn't just kill the interlock, it moved to protect Americans from mandatory buzzers. The belt survived physics in Detroit, it nearly died of a beeper. What finally moved the needle wasn't federal at all. It was New York State in 1984, the first law in America requiring drivers to actually wear the thing, and then state after state falling in line through the 80s and 90s until belt use climbed from that stubborn 10 and change percent to around 9 in 10 Americans today. By federal estimates, the belt now saves on the order of 15,000 American lives every single year. Estimates vary by decade and method, but the direction never has. Line those years up since 1959 worldwide, and you reach the figure attached to this invention: more than 1 million lives. There are countries whose entire populations are smaller than the crowd of people walking around today because of Niels Bohlen's geometry. Think about the full arc of this thing. A mid-century America armored in chrome and horsepower, losing a small city's worth of people every year to the second collision, in an industry that had tested the market and concluded safety doesn't sell. A Swedish president carrying a private grief who answered it by hiring a man whose profession was surviving the unsurvivable. A year of work producing not a gadget, but a geometry. 1 strap for the ribs, 1 for the hips, 1 buckle, 1 hand. So correct that in 65 years of relentless automotive change, its fundamental design has never needed replacing. Airbags came, crumple zones came, computers came. They all assume the belt. It is the load-bearing wall of everything since. And then the decision that makes this file unlike any other we've opened. The small company that held the century's most valuable automotive patent and unclenched its fist. Every carmaker on Earth took the gift. Some took decades to say thank you. And the country with the most cars and the most funerals fought the gift the longest, cutting it out, buzzing at it, legislating around its own irritation, before finally, 1 state law at a time, clicking in. Here's the last irony, and it's a gentle one for once. Volvo's giveaway bought it something no licensing empire could have: the word safety itself. Ask anyone alive in 1985 or 2005 what Volvo meant, and you got one answer: the safe car, a brand identity worth billions, purchased by refusing millions. Even the follow-up stayed in the family spirit. It was the Volvo president's own wife, a physiotherapist weary of treating whiplash patients, whose dinner table observations helped push head restraints into the cars in 1970. Bohlen himself went on to pioneer side impact protection, was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, and died in 2002, the same year, with the quiet symmetry history sometimes allows, that his belt's honors were still accumulating. The German Patent Office's judgment stands as his epitaph, one of the 8 patents of the past 100 years of greatest significance to humanity. Not one of the 8 automotive patents, one of the 8 patents, Period. Every time you get into a car, tonight, tomorrow, you will, without thinking, perform a small piece of choreography designed in Gothenburg in 1959 by an ejection seat engineer for a company that decided your life was worth more than its fortune. One hand, one motion, click. And there you have it. Cars were killing Americans by the thousands, so a grieving executive, a fighter jet engineer, and one V-shaped strap rewrote the odds, and Volvo gave the answer away to a world that took 25 years to say yes. So, tell me in the comments, and I know this one will fill up, when did you start buckling up? Voluntarily or only when the law came? Did your family's car even have belts in the back? And who else out there was protected all those years but nothing but Dad's right arm? If you made it this far, subscribe. We open a new file every week.